My earliest memories are steeped in the smell of freshly baked bread from my mother's kitchen and the clanging of tools in my father's workshop. Growing up in a small New York town, life was simple but full of purpose. The routines of daily life, coupled with a strong sense of community, taught me the value of hard work and persistence. My parents were the anchors of my world, providing stability and warmth even when the winters were harsh and resources were scarce. I remember dreaming of the day I would carve out my own path, blending the lessons they taught me with aspirations of a brighter, independent future. As I grew older, the desire to explore life beyond the confines of my childhood home only intensified. After high school, I ventured into the unknown, armed with ambition and an unshakable belief in a better tomorrow. Through struggles and triumphs, I built a life defined by resilience and a relentless pursuit of happiness. Yet, as the years unfolded, life's unpredictability often brought me back to the grounding lessons of my youth, lessons that would shape the decisions I faced later in life. Both of my children were grown-ups now. That was one of the reasons I decided to sell the farmhouse located outside Rochester. The other motivation was that I had grown tired of enduring the harsh winters. This part of the country could be productive, sure, but I no longer had any compelling reason to remain. I wanted to spend the rest of my life basking in sunny warmth, ideally alongside a wonderful woman. Now that's what I call a dream. My son worked as a teacher in North Carolina, while my daughter had recently gotten married and was expecting a baby after Christmas, which would make me a grandfather. Last year, she and her husband relocated to California. Maybe the warmer climate had something to do with her newfound family plans. Having sold the farm, I was sorting through the belongings that defined my years here. The movers would ensure everything reached California safely. My task was simply to label what was coming with me and pack the sentimental items. Most of the furniture stayed behind for the young couple who bought the place. It was their first real home. I only kept the books from my library and the original art that adorned the walls. The property spanned roughly 20 acres, complete with a spacious old house, 2 barns, a detached garage with room for 4 cars, and extensive fencing for the horses. Well, maybe not quite endless, but when you're the one painting it, it sure feels that way. This place carried a lifetime of memories. It was the first home I purchased for my kids after my wife left me for her lover, seeking escape from what she deemed a monotonous life with me. I raised my twins, Kelly and Brian Jr., here. Watching them grow into adults was a journey full of scrapes, arguments, and countless cherished moments. That was more than 2 decades ago now. Let me take a step back and explain things from the beginning. My name is Brian Carter. I was born in southern New York State, in a small town where nobody bothered locking their doors and Sundays were reserved for church services. You know the kind of town, where the highlight of the week might be watching the grass grow. My mother, who had a college education, passed on her knowledge to me, while my father ran a store. He worked tirelessly to ensure we had everything we needed for a comfortable life. When I was big enough to hold my own, my mother convinced my father that I should start music lessons. Now, neither of them played an instrument, so they didn't know much about the various options. They skipped over woodwinds and strings and instead wandered into a piano shop. As a kid, my first thought was, how am I supposed to manage one of those things in the Memorial Day parade? It worried me a lot. Keep in mind, I was just 11 years old, and the modern era of keyboards was still years away. The salesman at the store, however, was a pro. We had gone in intending to buy a small piano, but ended up purchasing an organ instead. Of course, we didn't leave with it that day. It was scheduled for delivery in 2 weeks. The organ wasn't brand new. It had been owned by a family whose circumstances changed when the husband was transferred out of state, and they decided against paying the steep cost of shipping it. That's likely why we got it. It was inexpensive. The store had already profited from its original sale and didn't need to charge much the second time around. I started taking lessons once a week and practiced an hour daily all through high school. At first, my mom wanted me to practice right after school, but that cut into my time with friends. My dad came up with a solution. If you practice right after dinner, I'll take over your dish-drying chore, he offered. You can stop practicing as soon as the dishes are done. At the time, I thought it was a great deal since I despised drying dishes. Normally, it took about 15 minutes, but somehow my dad stretched it to an hour. It was years before I caught on. By then, though, I genuinely enjoyed playing, and practicing no longer felt like a burden. In my teenage years, my taste in music shifted toward the rock and roll of my generation. The challenge was that most bands back then didn't use organs. They relied on guitars and drums. So I had to figure out how to replicate those sounds with the organ, using both hands and feet. Over time, I got pretty skilled at mimicking the sounds of popular bands. During my senior year of high school, my guidance counselor encouraged me to consider music school instead of a traditional college. To my surprise, I was invited to audition at the Eastman School of Music in Rochester, New York. With my organ teacher's help, I prepared classical pieces and refined my technique in the weeks leading up to the audition. When the day arrived, I was a nervous wreck. I couldn't eat or sleep, and my hands shook as I waited in the hallway outside the practice room. Other applicants sat silently around me, all lost in their own anxieties. When my name was called, I stepped into the audition room and was greeted by three kind-looking women and a piano. But I didn't play piano. Unlike an organ, a piano required a completely different touch, and I had never developed that skill. Staring at the unfamiliar instrument, I froze. One of the women noticed and asked gently, "Is there a problem, Mr. Carter?" I managed to nod. "Yes, ma'am, I don't play piano. I'm an organist." She pressed further. "You've never learned on a piano?" "No, ma'am," I admitted. "I've only ever played organ. If I'd known a piano was required, I wouldn't have come." The women exchanged whispers before one left the room. A few minutes later, she returned, smiling. "Mr. Carter, please gather your things and follow us. We've located an available organ." Relieved but still nervous, I followed them through the building. The halls were magnificent, marble floors, walls, and ceilings, with brass light fixtures and ornate oak doors. It was a far cry from the utilitarian corridors of modern schools. As we walked, the sound of music grew louder. We eventually arrived at a set of oversized double doors. One of the women opened them and the music swelled around us. Inside was an auditorium, with red velvet seats and a dazzling chandelier suspended from an intricately decorated ceiling. I later learned that George Eastman, the founder of Kodak, had donated the theater to the school in the early 1900s. "The Philharmonic is wrapping up their practice session," one of the women informed me. Another added, "Actually, that's the jazz ensemble. They play more contemporary music." The conductor brought the musicians to a dramatic finish and gave them a few parting instructions. As he prepared to leave, he noticed our group approaching. Turning back to his ensemble, he announced, "There's an audition happening on the organ for a prospective student. Let's make sure we exit quietly. It's a stressful experience." The room fell silent as I glanced around. All eyes were on me. Some of the musicians smiled, others nodded, and I could feel their acknowledgement. These were professionals, legends in their own right. And they were recognizing me, a 17-year-old kid from the middle of nowhere. But there wasn't much time to soak it all in. One of the women ushered me into the orchestra pit and began setting up the enormous concert organ. As I settled onto the bench, she walked me through the intricate layout of the massive console. I had never encountered anything like it before, and my chest tightened as panic set in. Failure felt inevitable. "It's a pipe organ," she explained. "There's a slight delay between pressing the keys and hearing the sound. I hope that won't be an issue for you. Let's start with some scales to warm up." Nodding, I played through the scales a few times. The lag wasn't as bad as I feared, and I quickly adapted. Soon after, another woman approached, handing me sheet music with a simple command, "Play." So I played. For 2 hours straight, I performed piece after piece while they evaluated me. When it was finally over, I climbed out of the pit, feeling drained but oddly satisfied. The women thanked me and said, "You'll receive your results in the mail within 2 months." As they left, I stood there, unsure of what to do next. Just as I turned to go, a single pair of hands began clapping. The applause quickly spread, and I realized the jazz ensemble had stayed to listen. They were cheering for me. A few even shouted words of encouragement. My heart swelled with pride as their applause wrapped around me like a warm embrace. For a brief moment, I felt seen, not as a kid trying to make it, but as an equal. The conductor, who had been seated in the back of the theater, approached me. "When you graduate, come find me," he said with a knowing smile. "I think I'll have a spot for you in one of my ensembles." 3 agonizing weeks later, I came home from school to my mom standing in the kitchen, a smile lighting up her face. "The Eastman School called," she said. "You've been accepted. Full 4-year scholarship. You start in the fall." And just like that, the next 4 years of my life were set. A sharp gust of wind rattled the windows, jolting me out of my thoughts. It was October, and the weather was every bit as miserable as you'd expect. Cold, wet, and unrelenting. Soon, though, I wouldn't have to endure it. I was moving to California, a place where such dreary weather was practically outlawed. I stepped into the kitchen to make coffee. only to remember that all my appliances had already been packed for the move. Opening the fridge, I hoped to find a beer or soda, but it was spotless and empty. Damn, these movers were efficient. With nothing to drink, I briefly considered ordering a cup of coffee from the local diner, then laughed at myself for the ridiculous thought. Resigned, I decided to brave the cold and walk into the village for a warm drink. But another fierce gust of wind howled against the house, making me rethink that plan. Coffee wasn't worth braving the storm. Instead, I wandered into the living room and began taking down the paintings I wanted to bring with me. Over the years, I had developed a passion for the art of the Wyeth family. It started with N.C. Wyeth's illustrations, especially those from classic children's books. I collected first editions featuring his work, along with high-quality reproductions of his paintings. Later, I branched out to the art of his son, Andrew Wyeth, who captured the essence of rural Pennsylvania in his vivid landscapes. My collection even extended to Jamie Wyeth, Andrew's son. My favorite piece of his was Pig, a breathtakingly detailed portrait of a pig that I had seen in a museum outside Wilmington, Delaware. I bought a smaller reproduction that day, and it became one of my prized possessions. Though I owned no originals, the cost of acquiring, insuring, and securing them was too high. I took pride in my collection of museum-grade reproductions. They were beautiful, fit seamlessly into my home, and spared me the headache of having to explain why an empty frame hung on my wall with a loan to the Met tag. Opposite the artwork hung my music industry awards. No, I hadn't become a household name or churned out platinum albums. My voice was decent, my looks unremarkable. And let's face it, organ music wasn't exactly the sound that topped the charts. Instead, I found success behind the scenes. My music education taught me how to compose both lyrics and melodies, and I had a knack for imitating the styles of other artists. I could write songs that sounded like they belonged to Frank Sinatra or another legend, blending nostalgia with originality. But this wasn't an overnight success. In the early years, I worked in a dull office, shuffling papers and inching my way up the corporate ladder to support my family. My big break in music came much later. As I thought back on those days, memories of my early struggles bubbled to the surface. After graduating from Eastman, I didn't land a dream job in music or become the next big thing. In reality, I didn't even have a lead. My degree, impressive as it was, didn't open doors the way I'd hoped. I ended up as a lowly clerk at a manufacturing company, surrounded by rows of identical desks. It seemed like I was destined to spend decades pushing paper. In my single days, I spent my nights doing the typical bachelor things, frequenting bars, catching football games, and attending car races. Bar hopping, in particular, was my go-to activity. The challenge, though, was deciding between hitting up lively venues with live bands, packed with guys vying for the same women, and the quieter neighborhood pubs where I could just hang out with my buddies. Of course, the bars with bands came with a steep price, cover charges and inflated drink prices, but they were also my best chance to meet women. As much as I hated the expense, the alternative was spending another night nursing beers with my friends, which didn't exactly help my dating life. Being an underpaid office clerk with both rent and car payments, I had to be strategic about my nights out. Most evenings, I stuck to cheap pitchers of beer with the guys, saving the club outings for Fridays or Saturdays. On those nights, I'd sip a couple of drinks over the course of the evening, trying to look cool. It was during one of these weekend outings that I met Mary. Mary was about 5'6", with a figure that could stop traffic. She was cute, friendly, and carried herself with a confidence that made her even more attractive. We danced the night away and spent the evening talking and laughing, getting to know each other. It took a couple more weekends of running into her at the club before I managed to get her out to my car. We kissed and fooled around a bit in the back seat, but she always stopped things before they went too far, insisting we head back inside. She had no trouble re-entering the club. Being a woman, the bouncers waved her through. But I, broke as I was, couldn't afford the re-entry fee. That pretty much summed up our dynamic. Mary always had the upper hand. A month later, I saw her again, sitting with a group of friends. She smiled at me as I approached, and we shared a couple of dances. But halfway through the second song, another guy walked up, wrapped his arms around her, and kissed her like they were in a movie. I froze, ready to intervene, until I saw Mary enthusiastically returning the embrace. Feeling like a third wheel, I slipped back to the bar, only to find my drink, jacket, and seat had all been claimed by someone else. By the time I spotted Mary again, she was heading out the door with her new guy. I walked home that night, shivering without my jacket, and growing increasingly bitter toward her with every step. Over the next few months, I kept running into Mary at various clubs. We'd exchange polite nods, but I never asked her to dance or tried to restart anything. Instead, I focused on meeting other women. At 6 feet tall with dark hair and piercing blue eyes, I wasn't exactly bad looking. I'd even been told I was easy on the eyes. Still, I wasn't bold, and my reserved nature often left me overlooked. "You're just too shy," women would say. Maybe they were right, but it was how I was raised, not to push or pressure anyone. One night, while I was taking a break at the bar, I heard a familiar voice. "Hi, Brian. Don't you want to dance with me anymore?" It was Mary, standing behind me with a playful smile. "I'm just taking a breather," I replied coolly. "Work tomorrow, you know." "But Brian, I want to dance." "Mary," I said, my tone sharpening, "this place is packed. I'm sure someone will be happy to dance with you and walk you out to the parking lot." Before she could respond, I stood up and headed for the door. She tried to follow, but a couple of guys intercepted her, eager for her attention. The last thing I saw before leaving was her flirting with them as though I'd never been there. Rochester wasn't a huge city, so there weren't many clubs with dance floors, which meant I kept bumping into Mary. For months, we continued our awkward avoidance routine. Sometimes, though, I swore I caught her watching me. Still, I stayed distant, figuring it was for the best. That all changed one night as I was walking to my truck after leaving a club. The sound of a woman crying out caught my attention. It wasn't the kind of noise you hear during a good time. It was sharp, desperate. Grabbing a nearby push broom, I broke the handle, fashioning a makeshift club, and headed toward the sound. My heart raced as I approached, listening for any sign of what was happening. I heard fabric tearing, a man cursing in pain, and the unmistakable sound of a fist hitting. Picking up speed, I rounded the corner of a parked car and froze. Two men were pinning a woman to the ground. One held her down while the other struggled to pull off her jeans. Her terrified eyes met mine, and I realized with a sickening jolt, it was Mary. Without hesitation, I charged toward them, gripping my makeshift weapon tightly, ready to fight for her safety. The instinct to act took over before I even thought it through. I swung the broom handle, striking the man, pinning her down, connecting hard. He stumbled back, collapsing. The second man, who had been trying to forcefully restrain her, froze before scrambling to his feet. I acted again with my makeshift club, striking him on the side. He staggered but tried to get up, so I struck again. I didn't stop until someone intervened and pulled me back. In hindsight, it's a good thing they did. I might have gone too far. The bouncers restrained me until the police arrived. Once everything was under control, the two individuals were taken to the hospital and later charged with attempted misconduct. A detective interviewed me about what had happened. He sternly reminded me of the risks of intervening in such situations, how I could have been seriously hurt, and how I should have let law enforcement handle it. But after delivering his lecture, he leaned in and whispered, "Good job, son." Later, I learned that these men had been involved in a string of attacks in the area. That night, I also found out the details of what Mary had been through. She had arrived at the club with a friend who left her behind, and she'd accepted a ride home from one of the attackers. Instead of taking her home, they drove to the back of the parking lot, where their intentions became clear. Mary fought hard, scratching one guy's face and struggling to get free, but the other grabbed her. If I hadn't come along, she might not have survived. A policewoman wrapped Mary in a blanket and brought her over to me. She was trembling, her jeans torn, and clutching at what was left of her bra for modesty. When she saw me, she broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. She clung to me like her life depended on it, and I had no choice but to scoop her up and carry her to my truck. The officer followed, carrying Mary's purse and helping me get her settled in the passenger seat while keeping her decency intact. I didn't know where Mary lived, so I brought her to my apartment. My plan was simple. Let her rest in my bed while I slept on the couch, then figure things out in the morning. But that plan went out the window quickly. For the next few nights, the only way Mary could sleep was in my arms. She woke up screaming whenever I tried to leave her alone, so I stayed. Holding her, comforting her. It wasn't exactly a hardship, but I did my best to be respectful. Mary never returned to her apartment. 6 months later, when her lease ended, she let it go without a second thought. She'd been living with me since the night of the attack, and by then, it was clear that neither of us wanted her to leave. Years later, I was back at my old farmhouse, tying up loose ends. The house had been emptied out. All the furniture, linens, and other belongings had either been packed for my new place or donated. When I heard a knock at the back door, I thought it might be the cab I'd called to take me back to the city. Opening the door, I got the shock of my life. It was Mary, but not the Mary I remembered. She looked frail, her frame so slight she couldn't have weighed more than 80 pounds soaking wet. Her clothes hung on her like rags, and her face was a patchwork of scars. Her nose had been broken and flattened, and a jagged scar ran from her temple across her face, ending near her mouth. Most shocking of all was the eye patch she wore. It wasn't just for show. I knew instinctively there was nothing underneath it. My mind snapped back to the day she left. A memory burned into my mind. I had been at work when my supervisor handed me a note. "Your neighbor called," he said. "Your kids are at her house. Your wife isn't home." Confused and worried, I called the neighbor, who explained that my 6-year-old twins were safe at her place. But something was very wrong. "Mary moved out," she said. "Around 10 this morning, a van showed up and she and 2 men loaded it with her things. They left the house wide open. I went over after they left to lock up, but the place was a disaster. Drawers overturned, clothes everywhere. Another neighbor and I spent the afternoon cleaning up so the kids wouldn't be scared." I'd driven home in a daze, unsure what to expect. When I arrived, Sue Sharp, my neighbor, met me at the car. "Brian," she said gently, "I'm so sorry." Mary didn't just leave. She made a scene. Those guys she was with, they were all over each other, laughing and groping. It was disgusting. I thanked her numbly, words failing me. Now, standing face to face with Mary all these years later, I felt the weight of those memories pressing down, mingled with the shock of her appearance. What had happened to her in the time since she walked out of our lives? The days following Mary's departure were a whirlwind of activity. I spent hours meeting with lawyers, closing bank accounts, freezing credit cards, and taking care of everything necessary to protect myself and the kids. The hardest part, though, was explaining to Kelly and Brian Jr. where their mom had gone. I didn't know, so I told them a half-truth. It was painful to lie, but I couldn't bear to let them feel the hurt I was carrying. Kelly burst into tears, worried her mom was hurt or lost, while Brian Jr. held her close, his face calm and stoic. It was a bond only twins could understand. The divorce took nearly a year to finalize. Since Mary couldn't be located, my lawyer filed on grounds of desertion. There were no arguments about child support, alimony, or visitation rights. As far as the court was concerned, she no longer existed in our lives. Technically, it takes 7 years to declare someone legally dead, but for me and the kids, that chapter was closed. After putting the kids to bed each night, I found solace in my music. Sitting at my organ, I began composing and writing lyrics, tailoring each song to the styles of various artists I admired. Over time, I became skilled at mimicking their sounds. Occasionally, I'd play for neighbors who would swear they recognized the song as something by the Beatles or another famous band, but couldn't quite place it. Their reactions made me smile, knowing I had created the music from scratch. It became a passion, filling the quiet evenings with purpose. One day, I ran into Jake, a classmate from my Eastman days. He'd had some moderate success with a few hit albums, but was struggling creatively when we reconnected. As we caught up, the conversation kept circling back to his slump. He was frustrated and desperate for inspiration. Wanting to help, I invited him to my house under the pretense of visiting the kids. After we played some music together, I had a sense of his style and decided to share one of my songs with him. We played it a few times, refining it until he felt comfortable. The next morning, I found Jake in my driveway at the crack of dawn, excited as a kid on Christmas morning. He'd stayed up all night tweaking the lyrics and was eager to share the revised version. Over coffee and breakfast, he performed it for me and the kids, who were thrilled to see a song come to life before their eyes. Jake and I spent the entire weekend working on more songs. By Sunday evening, he left my house with 10 new tracks, already coordinating practice sessions with his band as he walked to his car. A month later, Kelly burst into the house shouting for me to turn on the radio. One of the songs Jake and I had worked on was playing, climbing the charts fast. Hearing my music on the radio was surreal, even if no one but Jake, the kids, and I knew I'd written it. For a moment, I felt a quiet pride. A few days later, Jake called with more good news. "The label wants to do an entire album around this new sound," he said, his voice brimming with excitement. "Jake, that's incredible," I replied. "I'm so happy to see your career taking off again." "Brian, it's your music," he insisted. "I set you up with an agent. You're going to get every cent of the royalties you deserve." At first, I protested. "Jake, those songs were my gift to you. I don't want to profit from your success." "Stop being a martyr," he shot back. "This is my way of saying thank you." Within a few months, royalty checks started arriving. Initially, they were substantial, like having a well-paying second job. Over time, as Jake and his band found their stride, the checks became smaller, eventually tapering off. Still, The experience had been rewarding. Jake had his mojo back, and I felt fulfilled knowing I'd helped. 2 years later, the phone rang one evening. This time, I answered it myself, expecting another teenage boy calling for Kelly. Instead, it was Jake. "Hey, Brian, how's the new place? You getting settled in?" "A little," I admitted. "Still setting up." "Good, because I have someone who could use your help." "What kind of help?" I asked cautiously. "She's looking to make a comeback, but needs music in her old style. She's been struggling, and I told her you're the guy who can deliver." "Who are we talking about?" I asked, intrigued. When Jake said her name, I nearly dropped the phone. She was a multi-platinum artist, a household name. I felt a wave of both awe and doubt. "I don't know, Jake. She's a legend. I'm just a guy who writes songs in his living room. She's willing to move into your house for a couple of weeks so you can work together," he added, laughing. "But I warned her, you're all business." "Jake, my kids are home. There's no room for anything but songwriting." A week later, Kelly handed me a message from Jake. "Be at the airport at 7 a.m. on Saturday to meet your house guest," it read. When Kelly asked who was coming, I simply said, "A friend. We're going to make music." Saturday morning found the three of us, me, Kelly, and Brian Jr., standing near the airport's arrivals area, scanning the crowd for Jake's friend. Kelly and Brian were craning their necks, clearly expecting someone glamorous or flashy, while I kept my own expectations grounded. Suddenly, a woman with an unassuming demeanor approached me. She looked like an everyday suburban mom. Baggy clothes, oversized sunglasses. But when she spoke, I recognized her instantly. "Are you Brian Carter?" she asked, her voice as smooth and unmistakable as ever. I nodded, fighting back the surprise. "That's me," I said, turning to the kids. "Okay, team, she's here. Let's go." The woman smiled warmly and said, "Please, call me Beth." Kelly froze for a moment, her eyes widening as the voice she was hearing clashed with the plain appearance in front of her. Before she could blurt out the truth, I managed to cover her mouth with my hand. "Beth, these are my kids, Kelly and Brian Jr. Welcome to town. Let's grab your luggage and find some breakfast." Brian Jr., eager as ever to get behind the wheel, volunteered to retrieve the car from the parking garage. Any excuse to drive would do for him. Once, he'd even suggested driving next door to borrow milk, claiming it would get home faster and stay fresher. I made him walk, of course. Parenting a teenage driver is like a crash course in patience, and in my case, prematurely graying hair. While we waited for him to pull up, Kelly and Beth struck up an animated conversation, whispering and laughing like old friends. Watching them, I felt a pang of bitterness toward Mary, their mother, who had walked away from her children. I could understand someone leaving a spouse, but abandoning her kids, that was something I'd never be able to comprehend. My thoughts were interrupted by the unmistakable screech of tires against the curb. Brian Jr. had arrived, albeit with a bit of flair. I sighed. At least tires were cheaper to replace than fenders or bones. We loaded Beth's luggage into the car and headed home. That evening, once the kids were settled, Beth and I sat them down to explain her presence. I laid down the rules firmly. To your friends, she's just my cousin Beth from California. No exceptions. If anyone finds out who she really is, you'll both be grounded for life. And I mean it. The seriousness of my tone must have gotten through. The kids nodded solemnly before heading off to bed. As soon as they were out of earshot, Beth turned to me. "Don't you think that was a little harsh?" she asked. "No," I replied. "Kids talk without thinking. The last thing we need is for your visit to make headlines." She considered this for a moment, then nodded. "Fair enough, but you've done an incredible job with them, Brian. I've seen that in just one day." "Thanks," I said. "It hasn't been easy, but I wasn't about to walk out on them like their mother did." Changing the subject, we dove into the music. Hours passed as we worked in my studio, experimenting with melodies and lyrics. By the time the sun began to rise, we finally called it a night. The next morning, the kids let their teenage tendencies shine. Sleeping in well past 10 a.m., I stumbled downstairs, still half asleep, intending to quiet them down. Beth needed rest after our late-night session, and with her internal clock still on West Coast time, she could use all the extra sleep she could get. I promised the kids I'd cook their favorite breakfast after a quick shower, hoping a little bribery would keep them from making too much noise. When I came back downstairs, showered and dressed, I was greeted by the most delicious smells wafting from the kitchen. To my surprise, there was Beth, standing at the stove, flipping pancakes like she owned the place. But that wasn't the shocker. Kelly, my daughter who had never shown the slightest interest in cooking, was standing beside her, helping. "Hi, Dad," Kelly chirped. Beth's teaching me how to cook breakfast. Look, I made the pancake batter from scratch. Want some eggs and bacon too? I blinked, half expecting the scene to dissolve into a dream. This was the same girl who fought tooth and nail against loading the dishwasher, now offering to make me pancakes. I rubbed my temple and muttered, I think I need coffee. Beth lingered in the background, her smile radiant. I was nearly overcome with emotion, my pride for my daughter's achievements swelling to the point of tears. Her voice rang with joy, and I couldn't have been prouder. I'll have a little of everything, I replied with a grin. The breakfast was delightful, extra crunchy pancakes and all. I ate every bite with a smile, relishing the moment. Teen boys, of course, will devour anything in sight, but Kelly's pride was unmistakable. Afterward, Beth and I tackled the kitchen disaster while Kelly basked in the glory of her culinary triumph. I had almost forgotten how messy a new cook could be. It took us an extra 30 minutes to restore the kitchen to a semi-clean state. Later that afternoon, Beth and I were taking a break from working on our music. She turned to me and said, Kelly really needs a female role model right now. I'd like to step into that role if you'll let me. Her words caught me off guard. Wow, I hadn't even considered that, I admitted. I'd love for you to be her mentor, but there's a catch. You're only here for a couple of weeks. We have to think about how Kelly will feel when you leave. Beth cut me off before I could continue. Brian, I've thought it through. First, there's the phone. We can talk every day. Second, we're making incredible music together. After I head home, I'll need studio time to finalize everything. Then I'll be back to work with you. You might not realize it, but you've got a gift, and I'll need more of your songs, and... I tried to chime in, but she held up a hand to stop me. Quiet, let me finish, she said, smiling. When summer vacation rolls around, I'd like Kelly to spend some time with me on the West Coast. She could use a woman's perspective. I promised to take good care of her and bring her back safe and sound. Just then, Kelly walked into the room. Why'd you guys stop working? I want to hear what you've written. By the way, Beth, my dad is the best songwriter ever. Tears welled in my eyes, and Beth reached over, squeezing my hand gently. So, do we have a deal? She asked softly. All I could do was nod in agreement. Beth smiled. Kelly, why don't you put on the kettle for your dad and me? She suggested. Our songwriting spanned nearly 2 months, slowed by my day job. By the end, we'd composed enough material for almost 2 albums. During this time, Kelly and Beth were inseparable. As Beth's departure approached, Kelly grew quieter. One night, they disappeared into Kelly's room for an hour. When Kelly emerged, she flung herself into my lap, hugging me tightly. Daddy, you're the best dad ever, she said, tears streaming down her face. I looked up to see Beth standing in the doorway. I told her about our summer plans, Beth explained. Looks like she's on board. When Beth returned to California, her daily phone calls with Kelly became a ritual. Eventually, I had to get Kelly her own phone to keep the home line free. Beth's album skyrocketed to the top of the charts, her incredible voice belting out our songs wherever you went. 3 months later, I was at the airport waiting for her plane to arrive. She stepped off in a clever disguise, a brown wig with streaks of gray and enough padding to make her appear much heavier. This time, her stay stretched to 4 months, including a wonderful family Christmas. 2 nights after Christmas, I felt someone slipping into my bed. That familiar voice whispered, "Here's the rest of your Christmas gift," as she wrapped herself around me. We didn't sleep for hours, and when morning came, we stayed in bed, relishing each other's company, until a knock on the door interrupted us. Breakfast is in 30 minutes, Kelly called. Get moving, Beth laughed. Caught, she whispered. We both burst into laughter as we headed to the shower. If not for Beth's repeated no, we might have missed breakfast altogether. By May, Beth was preparing to leave again. We had enough songs for 2 more albums and a tour. As I watched her pack, a deep sadness settled over me. Kelly entered the room with a small, beautifully wrapped package, tears streaming down her face. I know you have to go, Kelly said, her voice breaking. But I'll miss you so much. I wish Daddy had married you first so you could be my mom. When my son came in to announce that the car was ready, he found all 3 of us in a tearful group hug. He joined in, presenting Beth with his own gift. Once summer arrived, I put Kelly on a plane to California. She spent her summer with Beth, while my son and I enjoyed some guy time filled with fishing, hiking, and camping. Labor Day came too quickly, and before I knew it, Kelly was back home, full of stories about her summer with Beth. The bonds we had all formed continued to grow, leaving me grateful for every moment. That summer, we decided to take on a new adventure and bought a couple of retired racehorses. The learning curve was steep, and we spent most of our free time figuring out how to ride properly and nursing the inevitable soreness with liniment. Despite the aches, it turned out to be one of the most enjoyable summers of my life. By fall, I made a big decision. I quit my job. The royalty checks from Beth's music had started rolling in, and they easily surpassed what I was making at work. Meanwhile, I kept in touch with Kelly every few days. She was having the time of her life, and occasionally, I'd catch a glimpse of her in the background during Beth's televised appearances. My heart ached with how much I missed them both. The tabloids even picked up on Beth's growing fame, and while their focus was on her, Kelly sometimes appeared in the edges of those glossy photos. Every time I saw their faces or heard their voices, I felt a lump in my throat. Labor Day came far too soon for Kelly, who returned home reluctantly. Back in her routine, she spent most of her time either chatting on the phone with Beth or hanging out with her friends. By then, I was missing Beth more than I could admit. That winter, Beth won multiple Grammy Awards for songs I had written. The kids and I watched the ceremony from the couch, shouting and celebrating as she took the stage. When she closed her speech with, "And a special thank you to my 3 friends back east, you know who you are," we erupted with pride. It was a surreal moment, knowing that a piece of me had reached the world through her voice. I was pulled out of this reflection by a voice I hadn't heard in years. It was Mary's. Once soft and sweet, her voice was now coarse and gravelly, worn down by years of cigarettes and alcohol. I barely recognized it. "Brian," she began, hesitating. "If you're hearing this, I guess we're divorced by now. It's been 20 years since I left you and the kids, but I need—" Her words trailed off as her mind seemed to drift back to that time in her life. Mary, then, was a woman disillusioned and restless. The twins were 6, and with them starting school, she suddenly had long, empty days to fill. Brian was at work, and the kids were away, leaving her alone with her thoughts. What she saw in her reflection was a woman who had lost her purpose. Her days blurred into hours of watching soap operas, while her friends seemed to have moved on with meaningful lives, families, careers, and goals. Mary felt trapped, a spectator in her own existence. Looking back, Mary recognized the crossroads where her life had taken a sharp turn. She had been a party girl in her youth, thriving on attention, with little ambition beyond the next good time. Meeting Brian at a club had seemed serendipitous at the time. He was well-dressed, polite, and attentive, qualities that stood out in the sea of men she usually encountered. Their chemistry was immediate, though fleeting. After a few dances and some awkward moments in the parking lot, she had dismissed him as too inexperienced to hold her interest. Instead, she sought out an old lover to satisfy her fleeting desires. Yet Brian lingered in her thoughts. Over time, their paths crossed again, and something about his sincerity broke through her jaded exterior. They fell in love, married, and started a family. For a while, it seemed like the life she hadn't known she wanted. But as the years passed, domesticity wore on her. The monotony of housework and childcare suffocated her, and she longed for the freedom she once had. One day, during an aimless stroll through a mall, she heard her name being called. It was Sherry, an old friend from her party days. They reconnected over coffee, reminiscing about the wild nights they once shared. Sherry still lived that carefree lifestyle, and Mary envied her independence. Their meetings became frequent, and soon Sherry introduced Mary to a new circle of friends. That's when Mary met Tyrone, a charming and charismatic man who reawakened her rebellious spirit. Their gatherings revolved around smoking marijuana and pushing boundaries. What started as mild flirtations spiraled into a full-blown affair. Mary didn't feel remorse. She felt alive. For the first time in years, she felt unburdened by responsibility and embraced the chaos. Over time, these rendezvous grew darker. Mary and Sherry became willing participants in increasingly debauched gatherings. Lines blurred, and boundaries vanished as they engaged in reckless behaviors, often surrounded by men who saw them as nothing more than entertainment. For Mary, it became an escape, a life where she could forget her obligations and lose herself in the moment. Looking back, Mary could see the cracks forming in her marriage, but at the time, she ignored them. She believed she was chasing freedom, though it came at the cost of everything she once held dear. As she sat before Brian now, the weight of her choices hung heavy in the air, and her words seemed stuck in her throat, unable to bridge the gap of 20 lost years. One day, Mary found herself at Tyrone's apartment with a few of his friends. The atmosphere reeked of desperation and indulgence. After her encounters with a couple of the men, she idly watched one of them preparing a needle. Without asking or warning, he plunged it into her arm. The rush that followed was unlike anything she had ever felt. intense, euphoric, and consuming. Within weeks, Mary began showing up at Tyrone's place every morning after her kids left for school. She made no effort to hide her descent. She arrived wearing only a coat and shoes, discarding the coat as soon as she entered. The encounters began immediately, often before she reached the bedroom. The needle always followed, filling her with a bliss so overpowering that she lost herself, drifting into unconsciousness. Each dose grew stronger, pulling her deeper into an abyss she didn't care to escape. Soon, Mary's obsession became her life's centerpiece. She stopped caring about anything else. One day, the men dressed her, packed some of her belongings into a van, and gave her another shot before driving away. It was the last time she ever saw her home. Her existence spiraled into a cycle of submission and pills. Mary's life was reduced to a grim routine of enduring whatever was demanded of her in exchange for the next dose. The substances became her only solace, her sole purpose. She didn't care about dignity or the cost of her actions. She lived only for the fleeting relief they provided. As time passed, Mary sank further into depravity. She remembered hazy fragments, degrading acts with men, women, and sometimes worse. She recalled performing explicit acts on stage, exposing herself to strangers, and sinking into behaviors that obliterated any semblance of her former self. Over the years, her body deteriorated and her mind became a blur. She wasn't even coherent enough to dance anymore, let alone resist. One day, Tyrone informed her that she was leaving. He had sold her to a new owner. Mary was loaded into a vehicle and transported to a brothel in Mexico, where her life became a waking nightmare. There, she was kept sedated. If a client complained, she was tortured. Time lost all meaning. She existed only in fragments of pain, brief relief from a shot, and the endless parade of customers. At one point, she became pregnant. The captors restrained her and forced a traumatic medical procedure without proper care. The experience left her in unbearable pain, both physical and emotional, with lasting scars. Her pills intake was manipulated as a means of control. Compliance brought minimal relief, while dissatisfaction led to further suffering. This cycle defined her existence, a harrowing balance between fleeting moments of reprieve and relentless torment. Time lost all meaning as her days blurred into one endless nightmare. One day, she was thrown into a van alongside others who had not survived. The air was suffocating, filled with despair and the weight of her circumstances. She knew the vehicle was heading to a remote location, and fear consumed her. Her thoughts spiraled into desperation, but her mind was too clouded to act. Eventually, the van stopped, and the silence was broken by distant sounds of chaos. She braced for the worst, but then the noise ceased. The back doors opened briefly, but the sight inside caused the onlookers to retreat, leaving her alone with the haunting stillness. Mary summoned the strength to kick open the doors and tumble onto the desert floor. Somehow, she managed to reach the front of the van, where she discovered the driver and his companion, both lifeless, their presence already drawing desert scavengers. Inside the vehicle, she found a stash of supplies: medication, water, and food. Realizing the supply was limited, she carefully rationed the medication, gradually reducing her intake to stave off withdrawal while making it last as long as possible. For the first time in years, she wasn't completely consumed by the immediate need for her next fix. But she also knew that the moment the pills ran out, the agony would return. For now, she clung to the fragile peace she'd found, unsure of what her next step would be, or if there even was one. One scorching day in a remote desert village, a poor Mexican farmer stumbled upon Mary, barely alive, huddled in the dirt near an abandoned van. Her sunburned skin and emaciated frame spoke volumes of her suffering. Without hesitation, he wrapped her in an old, tattered blanket and carried her to his battered truck, driving her back to his small village. There, he entrusted her to the care of the local priest. The priest, 2 compassionate nuns, and a doctor worked tirelessly to save her. Mary endured agonizing withdrawal under the watchful eye of the doctor, who stayed with her through the relentless tremors and racking pain. Meanwhile, the priest and nuns prayed fervently for her soul. Over 6 months, Mary was nursed back to health, slowly emerging from the wreckage of her obsession, though not without scars. She bore a deep, disfiguring gash across her face and had lost one eye, a mystery even to her. The first time she saw her reflection in the mirror, her remaining eye filled with tears. Once beautiful, she now looked battered and broken. That night, overcome by despair, she attempted to take her own life. A nun caught her in time, gently bandaging her wrists and staying by her side. From then on, the nuns took shifts watching over her, ensuring she couldn't act on her pain. They removed the mirror from her room, not returning it for almost a year. When they finally brought it back, Mary accepted her new appearance with a quiet resignation. All she requested was a clean eye patch. One day, she looked at a calendar and realized 16 years had passed since the fateful day she met Sherry in the mall. Memories of her old life began to surface, her family, her children, and the life she'd left behind. Determined to return home, Mary faced her next challenge. She had no money, no identification, and no way to start her journey. The small church community came together, raising enough funds to buy her a bus ticket to Mexico City. From there, Mary worked odd jobs, scraping together enough money to continue her trip to a U.S.-Mexico border town. At the border, her lack of identification barred her entry. It took 2 years of persistence and bureaucratic struggle before she managed to obtain a green card listing her nationality as Brazilian. The designation puzzled her, but her sun-darkened skin made the claim plausible. It didn't matter. What mattered was getting into the United States. Once across the border, Mary embarked on a grueling year-long journey back to the Northeast. She took whatever work she could find, hitched rides when possible, and slept wherever she could, under bridges and alleys or wherever she wouldn't be disturbed. Her scarred face and eye patch warded off unwanted attention, as most people assumed she was dangerous or deranged. She finally made her way to Rochester, where she remembered her family's old address. But when she arrived, the new occupant told her the family had moved out over a decade ago to a small farm outside Minden, New York. The woman offered no invitation or further assistance. With the last of her money, Mary rented a dingy room in the village and began piecing together clues about her family's whereabouts. She found work on a cleaning crew, scrubbing offices at night while continuing her search during the day. Finally, late in October, she found an address. Excited and filled with hope, Mary began hitchhiking to their home. She couldn't afford a taxi, but her determination pushed her forward. Her final ride dropped her off at the entrance to a long driveway. The weather had turned bitterly cold, and rain mixed with sleet drenched her thin clothes. Wrapping her arms around herself for warmth, she began the long walk up the driveway. By the time she reached the house, she was soaked and shivering uncontrollably. Dim lights glowed from the back of the large home, guiding her through the darkness. She rang the doorbell and waited, trembling. The door opened, and there stood Brian. For the first time in 2 decades, Mary felt a flicker of light inside her battered soul. She was home, or so she thought. My expression hardened as he took in the sight of her. Memories of lonely nights, crying children, and a broken family came flooding back. Without a word, I shut the door. The sound of it closing echoed in her ears. Despair overwhelmed her, and she slumped against the door, sliding to the ground. Inside, I hesitated. Beth will never forgive me if I don't help her, he muttered to himself. Imagining her stern disapproval, he turned back and opened the door. There lay Mary, crumpled and soaked, struggling to stand. Her whispered apologies were barely audible, but the sight of her frail frame and trembling lips stirred something in him. I reached down, lifting her by the arms until she was upright. She clung to him weakly, mumbling incoherent words. I sighed, lifting her into his arms. She weighed almost nothing. Her body was icy to the touch, and I knew she needed help. Carrying her inside, I resolved to take the first step, unsure of what lay ahead but unwilling to let her collapse in the cold. When I realized how dire the situation was, I grabbed my phone and dialed emergency with one hand while trying to keep my composure. The state police arrived first, their flashing lights illuminating the driveway, followed closely by an ambulance. The EMTs wasted no time. They wrapped Mary in a thermal blanket, adding heat packs to help stabilize her shivering. As they worked, they coordinated with the local hospital via radio, receiving permission from a doctor to start her on an IV. I watched, numb, as they took over her care. While the EMTs worked, a state trooper approached me with a clipboard and an air of professionalism. "Do you know her?" he asked. "Yeah," I said, my voice heavy. "She's my ex-wife." "How long have you been divorced?" he followed up. 20 years, I admitted. "I haven't seen her since she disappeared back then. I don't know what happened to her." The questions continued, but my focus kept drifting to Mary as the EMTs loaded her onto a stretcher and into the ambulance. Before they left, I turned to the officer. "I don't have a car here. Can you give me a ride to the hospital? I need to answer their questions too, and you can finish yours there." He hesitated for a moment, then spoke into his shoulder radio. I only caught snippets of the conversation, most of it in code, but I recognized the name of the hospital. Moments later, additional police cars pulled up, parking haphazardly across my lawn. One officer informed me that they'd be securing the house while I was away. Judging by the deep tire tracks, they weren't going to be fixing my lawn anytime soon. The trooper led me to his car, opening the back door. "Rules," he said when I hesitated. "No civilians in the front." The ride to the hospital was fast, and he spent much of it on the radio. Once we arrived, I was let out of the back seat and escorted inside. After Mary was admitted, I signed the necessary paperwork, agreeing to be financially responsible for her care. They allowed me to see her, but the trooper trailed behind, still asking his endless stream of questions. Mary was lying in a small cubicle separated from others by flimsy curtains. Oxygen tubes were in her nose, an IV hung on a pole beside her, and monitors beeped quietly around her. Her face was pale, her body frail, and her eyes closed. My chest tightened as I stood there, wrestling with a swirl of emotions. I wanted to hate her for the years of pain she had caused, but compassion for her suffering kept overriding my anger. For a moment, I wished Beth were there to ground me, to help me sort through the turmoil. But Beth was thousands of miles away in California, and I was alone. A pair of nurses and an orderly interrupted my thoughts. One of them informed me, "We're going to keep her overnight. We have a room upstairs ready for her." The other nurse added with a small smile, "She's going to be okay. Her vitals are good, and the doctor says her heart sounds strong. In a few days, she'll be back on her feet." The word home popped into my head. She doesn't have a home anymore, I thought. Not really. I stepped away to call Beth and explain the situation. She listened patiently, then grilled me with her trademark intensity, tougher than any police interrogation. When she finally calmed down, she said, "Stay with her, once we know more. If she's willing, bring her here. The kids would like to see her, and I'd like to meet her." Mary spent a week in the hospital. I stayed by her side because she wouldn't let go of my hand. Each time she woke up, she would look at me, see I was still there, and start crying. It broke something inside me to see her so fragile. The police and FBI interviewed her extensively about the past 2 decades. I learned more about her horrifying journey than I ever wanted to know. When the interviews were done, I called Beth and recounted everything. By the time I finished, we were both in tears. One day, after returning from my hotel room freshly showered, I noticed Mary's door was closed. A new sign hung on it, "Biohazard, do not enter." A nurse found me and led me to a small conference room where a doctor joined us. His expression was heavy, and I knew bad news was coming. "There's no easy way to say this," he began. "Mary has a severe, untreated STD. It's very advanced and untreatable at this stage. She has about 6 to 7 months left to live." The tears came before I could stop them. I felt gutted. All those years she had endured, clawing her way back to some semblance of life, only to be met with this. It felt cruel, unfair. I couldn't stop thinking, why now? Why this? Later that afternoon, I called Beth. After hearing the news, she said softly, "Bring her home to us. She doesn't deserve to die alone." It took another week to arrange everything. Beth worked her magic, calling in favors I could never have managed. We flew west on a private jet donated by one of her business acquaintances. When we arrived in California, Beth welcomed Mary into our home with open arms. We set her up with a health aide, making her as comfortable as possible. Whatever time she had left, she wouldn't face it alone. The first time Mary met Kelly and her husband Edward was unforgettable. Kelly, 7 months pregnant and glowing, brought Mary to tears. When Kelly tried to hug her, Mary stepped back saying, "I'm not clean. I won't risk hurting you or the baby." Kelly stayed determined. "I'll be back tomorrow," she said. "I need to know my mother while I can." For the rest of Mary's time with us, Kelly visited almost daily, missing only 4 days to give birth to her daughter, Mary Beth. When Beth told Mary about the baby, they cried together. Kelly brought the baby to meet both grandmothers, but Mary refused to hold her, fearing the risk of infection. My son, however, never visited. He couldn't forgive Mary for leaving, and when I explained his feelings to her, she cried, but never brought him up again. Mary grew weaker over the next 6 months. One morning, she passed peacefully in her sleep. We cremated her and placed her ashes in an urn under a small garden pavilion. We often sit by her resting place, updating her on family life. Despite everything, I hope she finally found the peace she sought. Social media exploded in popularity in the early 2000s, drawing users in droves. Across various platforms, the number of accounts quickly grew from millions to billions, yet the authenticity of many of these profiles remained uncertain. Despite their popularity, these platforms held no appeal for some of us. We just weren't tempted to check them out. However, my teenage daughter, Evelyn, was eager to get involved, and right after she turned 13, my wife, Sarah, allowed her to sign up. I had my reservations about it, but I trusted Sarah's judgment. She was a fantastic mom, and usually made wise decisions. A few weeks later, during one of our dinners, Evelyn wondered if Sarah and I might be interested in joining too. "Sure, that sounds great," Sarah agreed cheerfully. "No thanks, I'll pass," I said, hoping that would close the topic. Yet Evelyn persisted, eager to convince us. "It's really fun, Dad. You get to see what your friends are up to, and there are all kinds of games you can play." "Sweetie, I already catch up with my friends face-to-face or over the phone. I don't need a website for that. Plus, we have plenty of games around here if I want to play," I countered. "But Dad, what about Aunt Linda? When did you last talk to her?" "Oh," I said, pausing, trying to recall when exactly. "I think it was a couple of weeks ago." "Did you hear she got a new car? About 6 weeks back? It's red and looks really cool. Beth, her cousin, will be getting Aunt Linda's old car when she gets her license in a few months." "You're friends with Aunt Linda on there? And she got a new car?" I was a bit surprised. I thought her old one wasn't that old. Sarah nodded, smirking at my surprise and expression, though part of my reaction was due to the unsettling thought of my niece driving on actual roads instead of just around their church parking lot. "Yeah," Evelyn replied, looking at me like I was crazy for not knowing. "Told you should join." Sarah and I discussed it that night. I suppose I shouldn't have been too surprised when Sarah took Evelyn's side, especially since she had already given our daughter permission to join and had set up her own account. Sarah said to me, "She might be right. It could be a good way to stay connected with our relatives and some of our old high school and college friends." "I'm not sure I'd want to stay in touch with a lot of them," I grumbled. I already kept up with my close male friends. The situation with girls was quite different. In high school, most either treated me badly or viewed me as a younger, immature brother. College was no different. The vast majority of co-eds ignored me outright. However, there were exceptions in such a large environment, especially as I progressed through my education. I made several female friends during college and even had a couple of girlfriends during my junior and senior years. That's why we decided to give social media a shot, though my main reason was secretly to monitor Evelyn's online activities closely. I had heard about dangers for young girls online, so I was determined to protect my daughter from them. I kept a close watch on Evelyn's account and was relieved to see that she displayed the level-headedness we had instilled in her. As my concerns eased, I also used the platform to reconnect with old friends. However, I made sure to avoid any interactions with former lovers to prevent upsetting my wife. There weren't many former lovers anyway. Besides a couple of chance encounters, they were all ex-girlfriends, except for one young lady from the building next door during my grad school days. Nowadays, she might be considered a friend with benefits, as we would hang out, drink wine, and occasionally get intimate. I figured it was okay to reminisce about old crushes as long as neither they nor Sarah knew about my previous feelings. I eventually reconnected with Maria, one of the few female friends I had from freshman and sophomore years. She was a close friend and also an unconscious crush of mine, but I made sure to keep our relationship strictly platonic. Based on past experiences, I knew trying to turn it romantic could ruin our friendship forever. So she inadvertently tugged at my heartstrings over time without realizing it. By the latter part of junior year, we naturally drifted apart as I began dating other girls more successfully. I didn't notice Maria's gradual distance until it was too late. Feeling we had never crossed any boundaries, I reached out to her as mature adults, sending a friendly note and a friend request, and eagerly awaited her response. When her reply came a few days later, I was taken aback. "Tom Jarrett, I'm sorry, but I don't recall ever knowing anyone by that name. You must have mistaken me for someone else." Knowing Maria's sense of humor from college, I initially thought she was joking. "Nice one, Maria. You almost had me there. How have you been?" But when I checked my computer next, her response was clear. "I'm serious. I really don't remember you. You must have the wrong person." That was a blow. We didn't hang out much in our senior year, but we shared a few classes freshman and sophomore years before she changed majors. Maybe she just wasn't reminiscing about our time together, so I tried to jog her memory. "Remember the Delta Lamb party with Mark and Christy? You sprained your ankle and I carried you piggyback to your dorm. We iced your ankle and you promised me a back massage once you felt better. By the way, I never got to collect on that. A week later, she replied, Sorry, you've mistaken me for someone else. I've never injured my ankle like that. And I wouldn't promise a back massage to anyone except a very close boyfriend. Please don't contact me again. That stung more than it should have. I mulled it over and decided that since she sent a final message, I deserved one too. I made it clear that it would be my last message and I wouldn't bother her again. After carefully crafting my response, I sent it. Dear Maria, it's probably better that you don't remember me and that we won't reconnect. Truthfully, it would likely go against the agreement I have with my wife about avoiding past connections. Even though you were unaware of the crush I had on you, I remember it well. It would feel dishonest to my wife if she were to inquire about our friendship. Perhaps you're aware of this, which might explain your hesitation to say hello. Either way, I understand and won't reach out again. I sincerely wish you a lifetime of happiness and good health. Yours from afar, Tom. I included a photo from my college album showing us with friends at a party during our sophomore year. Despite any denials, it was undeniable proof of our past connection. After sending that final message, Maria never replied, and I kept my promise not to contact her again. I returned the photo album to the basement and resolved to be more cautious about reconnecting with anyone Sarah might object to. Despite my efforts, Sarah reconnected with an ex-lover during a business trip to Chicago, which led to the end of our marriage. The trust we had built over 17 years was shattered. Evelyn was heartbroken, but eventually accepted the situation, dividing her time between Sarah and me. It was heartening to see her grow into a smart, beautiful young woman with promising opportunities. While Evelyn primarily lived with Sarah, I gradually recovered from the shock of Sarah's infidelity. I sought a more mature approach to life and had a few girlfriends over the years, but realized that commitment was more suited to cling wrap than to relationships seeking a fresh start. About 7 years later, Hello? Hey, Tom, it's Andy Reiner. How are you? Hi, Andy. Good to hear from you. I'm doing well. How about yourself? Andy and I hadn't kept in touch much lately, but we exchanged cards and occasional notes during Christmas to catch up. Never been better, my friend. Say, have you heard about our upcoming class reunion? 25 years, can you believe it? Gloria and I are thinking about going, but we want to see if any of our old buddies will be there. We don't want to end up at a table alone with strangers if none of our closer friends show up. You know how it goes? Yeah, I skipped our 20-year reunion for that exact reason, I confessed, although that wasn't the only reason. It was shortly after my divorce was finalized, and I wasn't keen on discussing it if I bumped into friends, let alone strangers. Do you know who's confirmed to attend? Well, right now, besides Gloria and me, we've got confirmations from Mark Savone, Keith, and Gabby Schilling. He listed off about 10 or 12 people I was close with, including Mark, my best friend and best man, and 3 couples. Some were definite attendees, while others were still deciding. That was enough for me to make a decision by the time he finished. Sounds like a great group, and I'm excited to catch up with everyone. Count me in as a yes. I'll go register right after we finish our call. The reunion is in October during homecoming, so we've got 3 months to go. Gloria and I are really looking forward to seeing you there. Please give her my regards, my friend. Talk to you again soon. 20 minutes later, I had registered to attend, signed up for some of the special activities, and got tickets for the homecoming game against the Cats. Later that evening, I weighed myself and set a goal to shed 10 pounds before the reunion. Even though I'd still be about 15 pounds above my college weight, I figured it would make me look pretty good. Reunion weekend finally arrived with 10 of us committed to attending. Mark and I were the only ones who were single, although Mark had never been married. Larry and Nina were both on their second marriages after divorcing their first spouses shortly after tying the knot. Keith and Gabby had married right after graduation, setting an example for those of us still in our first and only marriages, which made me feel somewhat down considering my own plans. On Friday, there were several activities planned, so I flew in on Thursday afternoon. A few of us gathered for dinner that evening and later had drinks at the hotel bar. Mark and I had been roommates during our sophomore year and remained close friends, so we spent the evening together chatting with our group and others who came and went throughout the night. The next day, Friday, we attended campus tours and seminars with some of our couple friends. The campus had changed considerably with new buildings and artwork, yet in many ways it still retained its charm, with young students socializing on the plaza and others rushing to class. I remember those days, remarked Mark, talking to girls until the last minute and then racing to class. Yeah, they'd chat you up, I chuckled. Did you see the note in the reunion brochure about the pizza joint near campus? It's still there, but it's under new management. I wonder if they've redecorated. Redecorated? I'm more curious if the pizza still tastes the same. We texted our group and met at the pizza place for slices and beer. The lobby displayed photos of past and recent visitors, including athletes and celebrities. Unfortunately, half the reunion attendees had the same idea, resulting in a long wait. This allowed us to chat and unwind. Josh and Stephanie shared stories of their European tour after selling their company, while Gloria discussed her upcoming book. Mark excused himself when he spotted Jane Mealer, his old crush from freshman and sophomore years. They finally hit it off nearly 30 years later. After decent pizza, I attended afternoon activities alone. Mark and Jane were absent from dinner, making me smile at the thought of their reconnection. We enjoyed a nice meal and conversation, briefly paying attention to class leaders' speeches. They welcomed us, acknowledged guests, made fundraising appeals, and reflected on our class. By the second or third plea for funds, most of us tuned out, and the speakers eventually wrapped up, allowing the music to begin. I mingled around the ballroom, catching up with old friends. I danced with Gabby, who was tired after dancing with Keith, and then with Nina and Stephanie. Later, Gloria joined me on the dance floor, prompting Andy to jokingly send her my way. A slow dance began, and as I was about to escort Gloria back, she suggested we waltz with some space between us. While dancing, she asked how I was doing, mentioning that she and Andy had been concerned about me and wanted to ensure I was all right. I appreciated my friend's care, but honestly, answering truthfully was a bit disheartening. So I escorted Gloria back to our table, thanked her and Andy, then headed to the bar for a drink. Standing in line, I glanced across the dance floor behind me and spotted Maria making her way towards the line. My heart raced more than it should have for someone who had been a crush nearly 28 or 29 years earlier. But she was still as lovely as ever, albeit visibly older. When she saw me, I waved, and she smiled and waved back before her expression turned serious. Approaching her, I greeted, "Hi, Maria, remember me?" She looked down for a moment before meeting my gaze and nodding. "Hi, Tom. Of course I remember you," she replied, opening her arms for a hug. Not wanting to miss the chance, I embraced my old friend for the first time in years. She felt comforting in my arms, and I rested my head against hers, taking in the scent of her hair. We held each other for several seconds before she squeezed tighter briefly and then relaxed. Taking the cue, I released the hug in return. "How have you been?" I asked. She glanced around before turning back to me. "Tom, can we get a drink and find somewhere private to talk?" We grabbed our drinks and wandered into the lobby, finding an empty sofa where we could sit and chat. "Is this all right?" "Sure, this works," she said with a smile. "It's so noisy in there that it's hard to gather my thoughts, and Tom, I owe you an apology and an explanation. That whole wrong person act you pulled, was that about 7 or 8 years ago?" She nodded. "I'm really sorry, Tom. I was so excited when I received your first message that I started typing right away. But as soon as I finished typing your name," she chuckled softly. "I only got as far as 3 letters, T-O-M, before I realized the implications if my incredibly jealous husband found out. Delete, delete, delete. It hurt each time, and my heart ached continuously over the next couple of days until I finally replied saying you had the wrong person. That hurt even more. I'm sorry, Maria, and I'm sorry I kept pushing." I sighed. "Actually, later on, I wondered if you truly remembered, but didn't want to reconnect because of your marriage. I would have understood and let it go. I should have just admitted it, Tom, and said we couldn't be friends at that time, but I needed— what's that term? Plausible deniability? Yes, exactly. Plausible deniability in case Vince found out. We were going through a rough patch back then. Are things better between you two now?" She took a deep breath and shook her head slowly. "There's nothing between us now. We divorced 3 years ago, after our son started college. It's like we live in separate worlds. We hardly speak unless it's about something happening in Vinny's life. If he ever gets married, they might have to have 2 ceremonies, so Vince and I can each attend one." Ouch, I'm sorry to hear that. Sarah and I don't communicate much these days either, but we still try to present a united front when it comes to Evelyn. She's a junior in college this year and is planning to pursue a career as a veterinarian. Maria, what's the matter? Tom, do you ever think about, what could have been? Yeah, sometimes, but I try not to dwell too much on missed opportunities that never materialized. Why do you ask? What's on your mind? Do you remember when you sent me that last note where you mentioned you had a big crush on me? Tom, usually girls pick up on some sort of hint in those situations, some sign, but I never got anything like that from you, no hints at all. or maybe I was just oblivious because we were such good friends. Anyway, I've often wondered what it might have been like if we had taken a chance and gotten together, even just for one night. Maria, you were a dear friend, and I wanted to keep it that way. I hate to admit it, but I still had some growing up to do back then. Yes, I had a big crush on you, but I had what you might call a wide range of crushes during freshman and sophomore years when we were close friends. I usually had crushes on several girls at once before starting to figure things out later in college, including the realization that it's not wise to have more than one crush at a time. However, during those first 2 years, it was rare that any of those crushes led anywhere. I chuckled, recalling some of the disasters. On the rare occasions when they did, it usually didn't end well. So instead of risking our friendship, I tried to conceal my silly crush on you. Sometimes I admitted it to one of the other girls as a cover, just to keep you in what today's youth might call the friend zone. Maria laughed. Tom, I think that term is well established, and maybe even outdated now. We both chuckled, but I wanted to steer the conversation forward. Maria, it doesn't matter anymore. If we're talking old expressions, it's like water under the bridge far downstream by now. Maria looked deeply into my eyes before slowly shaking her head. No, Tom, it's not irrelevant, and yes, it does matter. Take me upstairs to my room, or yours, and let's explore something new together. I've spent 7 years, or however long, wondering. Now I don't have to wonder anymore. She didn't need to ask again. I took her hand and we headed straight to the elevator. As soon as the doors closed, we were close together, her hands clutching my jacket to ensure I wasn't slipping away, and mine cradling her face, savoring her softness and the passion with which she kissed me. She kicked off her heels before we exited the elevator, and we practically dashed down the hallway to my room, giggling all the way. There, I locked the door behind us, and our kissing continued fervently. Oh, Tom, why didn't we do this back then? She whispered. Why was I so blind as to not see it? And why were you so afraid to tell me? Seriously, we wasted years that we could have been together, she said. Shh, don't say that, Maria. We had lives to lead, children to raise. But it's not too late to start now. We spent Saturday morning in bed, then grabbed brunch and headed to the game. Our tickets were in the same section, and we managed to sit together. The game was intense, with our team winning by 4 points in a thrilling finish. As underdogs, the stadium erupted in celebration. Maria and I went to our rooms to change for dinner. When I knocked on her door, she pulled me inside, and we almost missed our reservation due to making out. Mark and Jane noticed our smiles at dinner, mirroring their own. After dinner, we joined friends at the class party. We mingled and danced until Maria gave me a certain look. We left shortly after and returned to her room. That night, our lovemaking was even more passionate and confident. Despite living far apart, me in Dallas, Maria near NYC, we decided to keep our relationship steady but casual. Maria insisted we avoid making it official due to the distance, though I hoped for more. Over the next few months, we stayed connected, talking weekly and texting daily, seeing each other about once a month. To keep our relationship private from my daughter, Evelyn, and her ex, Vinny, we met in neutral places, exploring and relaxing in hotels with great room service and comfortable beds, where we spent most of our time together. However, things didn't quite go as we had planned. As our relationship progressed, my feelings for Maria grew stronger, and before long, I found myself falling in love with her, just as I had suspected might happen. We had agreed earlier not to rush into declaring our love, so I held back, contemplating how I could align my life and career to be with her full-time. While I wasn't enthusiastic about living in New Jersey or New York City, I was increasingly open to the idea of making sacrifices to spend my life with Maria. I was even willing to consider moving to a neutral city if she wasn't keen on relocating to Dallas with me. In May, we met up in Charleston for a weekend getaway. My flight had been delayed on Friday, and with our time together starting with a romantic Friday evening and Saturday morning in the hotel, we hadn't even ventured out to explore the city. As we lounged in the hotel room, I pulled out my laptop to look up local attractions I had bookmarked, hoping to entice Maria to venture out with me. Since it was a week before her birthday weekend, I had also secretly arranged a spa trip for her on Saturday afternoon, hoping to surprise her with a special treat. Maybe she'll have other ideas, I murmured to myself, considering different ways to spend the day together. Suddenly, a phone rang, seemingly from within our room. It wasn't my phone or Maria's, so I searched around the room trying to locate it. The ringing stopped before I could find it. I kept searching, but the sound had been faint and muffled, making it hard to pinpoint. Just as I was about to give up, the ringing started again. This time, I was determined to track it down, realizing it must have fallen behind or inside the dresser, possibly wedged behind a drawer. I continued searching and found the phone hidden in one of the drawers beneath Maria's clothes. It didn't belong to Maria, so I picked it up, curious about who had left it and how Maria hadn't noticed it when she packed her clothes. She hadn't brought much since we were leaving the next day. Since the phone had stopped ringing, I decided to take it to the front desk. Maybe they could locate the owner once I confirmed with Maria that it wasn't her work phone. I set it aside and returned to my laptop, but a series of notification sounds drew me back to the phone. I couldn't unlock it, but I saw some partial text messages on the screen, and another message popped up as I tried to make sense of them. WTF, are you? You're not at your sister's. Had to trick it out of her, but Trudy says you haven't. Trudy? That was Maria's sister's name, though we hadn't met. Maria had mentioned her a couple of times. You better be home when I get there or so. Call me now. A little later, I was still sitting on the edge of the bed, feeling deflated, when Maria walked in, practically dancing with joy. Oh, Tom, thank you so much. That was amazing. Tom, what's the matter? She seemed shocked, as if I had a stroke or something. But when I held up the phone for her to see, her face drained of color and she looked crushed. The phone kept ringing, Maria, and ringing. Did you forget to turn it off? She shook her head vigorously, tears streaming down her face. No, God, no. What game are you playing, Maria? Letting me fall for you while you're with someone else? Another lover? A husband? That's it, isn't it? God, Maria, how could you? If you're still married, we can't be together. Tom, no, it's not what you think. Really? So it's not your husband? The one you said you divorced? Or maybe you didn't? Or did you remarry and forget to tell me about that? She tried to hug me, to pull me into her arms like she had before with her lies. I stepped away, not wanting her touch. Oh, damn it, Tom. Please. It is Vince, but it's not what you think. Oh, really? I said incredulously. So all this time I've been falling for you? It hasn't been a complete lie? I grumbled, trying to keep my voice steady. And we're not cheaters, the scum of the earth like Sarah and her friend? Please tell me that's not true, because right now, that's how it looks to me and it's making me sick. I'm struggling to keep my lunch down, and if I manage that, I'm seriously considering walking out that door and never looking back. Tom, please, let me explain, please. Fine, but only because I cared about you, Maria. Or at least I thought I did. Now I'm not so sure, but go ahead, I'm listening. No more lies. She sat back on the bed, her hands clasped together tightly as if trying to wash away the guilt. Tears still streamed down her face, but at least she met my gaze as she spoke. Tom, I'm so sorry, but this is the truth. The awful truth. Vince and I had been struggling for a long time when you contacted me almost 8 years ago. We were still together, mostly for Vinny, our son. I was in therapy trying to save our marriage, but he wasn't interested and it wasn't helping. Eventually, things got so bad that I realized I had to leave him. I consulted a lawyer and started the divorce process, but Vince brought up the prenup I signed 17 years ago and threatened to enforce it to the letter. I'd end up with next to nothing. Sure, there would be some money, but nowhere near what I was used to. So you're a gold digger too? No, not like that. You see, Vince had a strict prenup, and he had Rafael Bonadus, one of the top divorce lawyers in the state. You know, those lawyers for rich people and celebrities who want to protect their wealth? I had some young lawyer fresh out of law school who was so inexperienced and scared that she probably panicked the first time she met Mr. Bonadus. When we negotiated what I'd get in the divorce, I would have ended up with next to nothing. Vince would have been laughing all the way to the bank, and Mr. Bonadus was probably messing around with my young lawyer. Actually, given his reputation, I wouldn't be surprised if he was, even after our case was over. A damn gold digger, I repeated, convinced by her explanation. And it sounds like your lawyer was one too. Well, they say birds of a feather flock together. No! Vincent DePrimo is big in his family business. Car dealerships, rentals, insurance, real estate, you name it. Divorce doesn't look good to them. He agreed to let me have some freedom as long as I'm discreet about it and provide him with plausible deniability, and that I'm there to take care of his needs whenever he wants. I've been telling him I'm visiting my sister Trudy or going to a conference or something. While I'm away, it gives him the freedom to do, well, whatever he wants for the weekend, but I guess something came up this time. Yeah, probably his libido. Needed some attention, I'm guessing. She winced, her expression confirming it was likely true, and I swallowed hard to keep from throwing up right there. I'm really sorry, Tom. I still want to divorce him, but I just haven't had the resources or the backup plan I need to do it. I wanted to tell you, but I was afraid of how you'd react. My stomach settled, if only briefly, and I let out a frustrated sigh. Maria, you knew how I felt and that I'd react like this. Yet you kept it from me? What were you thinking? If you had been honest from the beginning, maybe we could have faced this together and figured something out. Now, I don't know. I'm so torn. I love you and I'm furious with you at the same damn time. I've got to go. Tom, please stay tonight. Let's talk this through. Please. Maria, I'm sorry, but as long as you're married, there's nothing to discuss. And honestly, even if you divorce him and come back to me, I don't know if there'll be anything left to say. I thought you were not just my lover, but my best friend too. But now you've shown me you're a cheater and a liar, and I don't know you like I thought I did. And I don't know if I can ever trust you again. No, I'm sorry, Maria, but I need to leave and think about all of this. She cried and begged as I packed, making grand promises if I'd stay, but I knew I couldn't be manipulated, whether by love or lust. Within 5 minutes, I had my things packed and was walking out the door, trying to block out her tears and pleas. My heart felt like it had a giant hole in it as I flew back home, and that feeling lingered in the days that followed. When Maria and I reunited at the reunion, after so many years, I knew there was a risk of falling in love with her right from the start. Even though I tried to be cautious and avoid it, especially given the distance between us, it was inevitable after spending that intense weekend together. I tried not to let myself love her, but I couldn't stop it. Yes, I came to love her deeply, and I still do, but now my world was in turmoil, engulfed in a blaze she had ignited. It tore at my heart for her, and it threatened to shatter the person I thought I was. I sighed heavily, unsure of what steps to take next and how to navigate the situation with integrity, dignity, and love, assuming any of those were still possible. Realizing we had already crossed the line into adultery, any hope of maintaining honor and dignity seemed lost. As for love, despite everything, I wanted to continue loving her, but I questioned whether I could, even if she wanted me to. I was filled with anger towards her and anxiety about where we might go from here if she chose to divorce her husband. If not, I feared I might never see her again. It took me a week of pouring my raw emotions into carefully crafted words on the screen of my computer. I edited and re-edited my thoughts until I felt they were coherent enough to send. In the email, I expressed that she should reach out if she decided to pursue divorce or if she chose to remain with her husband. If neither happened, I promised to contact her again in a few weeks. It wasn't explicitly stated that it might be our last communication, but if Maria couldn't read between the lines, maybe she wasn't as perceptive as I thought. Over the next few weeks, my job consumed me, not because it had to, but because it offered a distraction from the turmoil I felt over Maria and the guilt of compromising my moral compass. That changed one weekend in June when Evelyn came to visit. "Dad, I've missed you," Evelyn said as soon as she arrived. "You've seemed so distant lately. Even when we talk on the phone, it feels like your mind is elsewhere. What's been going on?" She hit the nail on the head. I hadn't intentionally neglected her, but the personal challenges I was facing had definitely affected my focus on her needs. "Sweetheart, your mom and I always tried to instill in you the importance of doing the right thing," I began cautiously. "But I have to admit, I recently made a mistake. I did something that wasn't right, and it may have hurt someone else." Evelyn nodded knowingly. "Dad, I'm 21 now. Remember last year when I was torn between two guys? Mom told me about her own mistake with you. You both shielded me from the truth back then, but Mom said I needed to hear it now so I could learn from her failure. Yes, that's exactly what she called it. And avoid making similar mistakes in my life. It was a tough lesson, but I made the right choice. You wouldn't deny me that opportunity to learn from your mistakes too, would you?" I glanced at Evelyn, grateful that she had grown into such a thoughtful young woman, even if her curiosity sometimes got the best of her. She placed her hand on mine and asked gently, "What's going on, Dad?" I hadn't planned on revealing my mistake to anyone, especially not to my daughter, but I realized it could be a valuable life lesson for her, reinforcing what her mom had already taught her and possibly guiding her in the future. Taking a deep breath, I decided to open up. I reconnected with an old friend and we ended up falling in love over a few months. Just when I was thinking about making things more serious, I discovered she wasn't actually divorced like she had told me. Ouch! So she lied to you and cheated on her husband? And now you're feeling guilty about it, even though you didn't know? Evelyn's quick understanding and insight didn't surprise me. She was on track to graduate with top honors next year, after all. Yeah, that's about right. She claims her husband isn't exactly a saint either, but two wrongs don't make a right, Evelyn finished my thought, showing that she remembered the moral lessons we had taught her from a young age. Dad, what matters is that it wasn't intentional, and you stopped as soon as you found out, right? Yeah, but I'm not sure where things go from here, I admitted, feeling uncertain about the future. Well, that's what you should focus on. Moving forward, not dwelling on the past, Evelyn advised wisely. Smart kid, indeed. I smiled at her, appreciating her maturity and understanding. A few days later, Sarah called me out of the blue. Is Evelyn all right? I asked, concerned by the timing of her call. Yeah, she's fine, Tom, but she seemed worried about you. She didn't give me any details, but I just wanted to check in and make sure everything's okay. Sarah, I'm all right. It's nothing serious. I should have stopped there and thanked her for reaching out, but our long history of sharing made me continue. I made a mistake recently, and it's been tough dealing with the consequences. I'm sorry to hear that. Do you want to talk about it? No, not really, I hesitated. Well, maybe. Can I ask you something personal? She chuckled. We've asked each other plenty of personal questions over the years. It's a first for you to ask if you can ask. Shoot. When you had your affair, did you ever feel guilty? Wow, that's really personal and unexpected. I'm sorry, you don't have to answer that. I'll catch up with you later, okay? Wait, Tom, I actually want to answer that. I was grown up enough to understand that what I was doing was wrong. I knew it could hurt you and damage our relationship if it came out, but the temptation was strong, and the first time I wasn't strong enough to resist. After I crossed that line I never intended to cross, it didn't make me braver, but maybe it emboldened me to keep going. I knew it was wrong, and yes, I felt guilty and dirty afterward. But there was also an extra thrill that made me think I could get away with it until I got caught. When it finally happened, it was a relief in some ways, but facing the consequences was much harder than I ever imagined. I've been paying for that mistake ever since and regretting it every day. I'm truly sorry, Tom, for what I did to you and to our relationship. I regret the trust I broke. Thank you, Sarah, for being honest with me. I appreciate it, even now. What's going on, Tom? Why are you bringing this up now? You're not married, but wait, are you involved with someone who is... I was seeing someone and we were getting serious, but then I found out the truth and realized I was involved in adultery too, even though I didn't choose it. Tom, don't blame yourself if you didn't know. I made a terrible choice looking back on it now. But if you were unaware that she was married, you can't hold yourself responsible for something you didn't know. Yeah, I keep trying to tell myself that. It's been tough. Don't let it eat you up, Tom. Just remember, now that you know, you're accountable for the choices you make moving forward. It might feel challenging, but I've known you a long time, honey, and I believe you'll make the right decisions. The days went by with no word from Maria, so I began drafting a message, a farewell that would express my feelings. It felt like those scenes in old movies where the protagonist crumples up note after note into a wastebasket. Except in my case, the digital recycle bin on my computer would have been overflowing with discarded drafts, were it not for the ease of editing on screen. One evening, I was deeply engrossed in yet another revision after work when the doorbell suddenly rang. Peering through the door's peephole, I saw a sharply dressed man accompanied by two burly men in ill-fitting suits on the sidewalk. They reminded me of an oversized version of the old Bobbsey twins, a strange thought given the circumstances. I cracked the door open and asked cautiously, "Can I help you?" "Mr. Jarrett, I'm Vincent DePrimo. We've never met, but you know my wife, Maria, quite intimately, I understand. We need to talk. May I come in?" "Mr. DePrimo, this really isn't a good time," I replied, feeling uneasy. "Mr. Jarrett, I've come all the way from New Jersey. My associates and I would appreciate it if you could find the time to let me in. It would be in your best interest," he said firmly. With the two hulking men looming behind him, I couldn't deny their implied threat. Come in, Mr. DePrimo," I relented, opening the door wider and hoping I wouldn't regret it. I shut the door quickly behind him, wary of the Bobbsey twins potentially barging in. If things went south and they tried to force their way in, I feared I'd have a situation on my hands, a home invasion I wasn't prepared to handle, or rebuild my house if I ever got over this. Luckily, as I closed the door, he motioned to his associates, who acknowledged with a nod, halting halfway up the steps. The deadbolt clicked into place, and I faced him. Please, come in and have a seat in the living room. Can I get you some coffee, tea, soda, or maybe some scotch? I offered after a brief pause. His serious demeanor cracked into a faint smile. Scotch sounds perfect, Mr. Jarrett. I poured 2 glasses and handed one to him. What can I help you with, Mr. DePrimo? Is everything all right with Maria? He savored the aroma of the Macallan before taking a sip. She's all right physically, but we're in couples counseling. She's been telling me she's visiting her sister in Ohio or attending conferences for the past 7 or 8 months. Except for a trip to Cleveland in April, I don't think she's been in Ohio or seen her sister Trudy except during Christmas. After another sip, he continued. Which brings me to why I'm here, Mr. Jarrett. Did you ever sleep with my wife? He stared into my eyes, seemingly knowing the truth. I remembered Maria's admission about plausible deniability and hoped she hadn't lied to me again. Mr. DePrimo, Maria was an old and dear friend. I was mistaken about her marital status, but I assure you, I cared for her and would never betray her trust. I held his gaze, hoping he believed my sincerity. For me, my time with Maria was about love, not just physical pleasure. Vince DePrimo stared at me for what felt like an eternity before finishing his scotch in one gulp and placing the glass down firmly on the coffee table. Good, he said firmly. Now that's settled, there's one more thing. Maria is my wife, and despite our difficulties, I intend to keep it that way. I strongly advise you to stay away from her. If I hear of you two reconnecting or communicating, you won't like the outcome. However, if she goes through with a divorce and takes the financial hit we agreed on, then I won't care what you do with her. But consider if you want to invest your time in someone who has shown herself to be a liar and cheater. If she can cheat on me, her husband of 25 years and the father of her child, just think about what she might do to you. He stood up and added, Thank you for your time, your attention, and the scotch. Goodbye, Mr. Jarrett. I hope our paths don't cross again for everyone's sake. After he left, I poured another glass of Macallan and locked the deadbolt. My heart raced as I reflected on the situation. Over the past 8 or 9 months, I developed strong feelings for Maria. But she had lied to me, omitting her husband from her life story. I grew to resent her for what she had done to me, to us, and to her husband. Despite her claims of his infidelity, Maria had shown herself to be deceitful and disloyal, just as Mr. DePrimo had warned. I couldn't be sure if her accusations against him were true or false. Whether he had cheated or not didn't change things. Even if he had, it didn't justify her lying and cheating. More importantly, it didn't give her the right to involve me in her deceitful behavior. I found myself caught in her tangled mess, but it wasn't by my choice. I'd grown to love Maria, but it wasn't the real her. It was the persona she presented. Once I accepted this, I knew what I needed to do. A few days later, an overnight package arrived at my office. Inside was a handwritten letter from Maria atop a stack of bound papers. Dearest Tom, I deeply regret everything that has transpired. I'm taking steps to make things right so I can move forward and perhaps give our relationship a chance. Enclosed is the first part of the certified divorce petition to prove my sincerity. I never should have lied to you or used you. I'm truly sorry and vow never to deceive you again. She also shared her new address, phone number, and a private email address. Her heartfelt message brought tears to my eyes. After pondering all afternoon, aided by the rest of the bottle of Macallan, I sat down with my laptop that evening. I started typing her new email address but stopped. Despite Vincent DePrimo's warning, what I needed to convey couldn't be expressed through email or over the phone. I closed the email and opened my favorite travel app. A few days later, I took a chance and sent Maria a message through her new private email, hoping Vincent DePrimo wouldn't intercept it from my temporary email address that I'd likely never use again. We arranged to meet at a quiet cafe in Newark. When Maria arrived, she rushed over and tried to embrace me, saying, "Oh, Tom, I've missed you so much. I'm relieved you're here. You took so long to respond, I was really worried." I shook my head and gestured for her to sit down. "Maria, hold on, we need to talk." She sensed what was coming and pleaded with me, shaking her head. "Tom, please, don't do this, please." Her plea was painful, like being stabbed again, but I persisted with what needed to be said. "Maria, I loved you then, and I still do. But you played a dangerous game with your husband and with me, using both of us because you couldn't make a decisive choice. You tried to have us both, thinking maybe it was safe because of the distance between us. But I fell for you deeply, and I was willing to do anything, for you to come to me, or even for me to move here. But it all fell apart, as it was bound to when built on deception rather than honesty. I wanted to tell you, Tom. I really did, but it's too late for explanations, Maria. None of it matters now. You're finally getting the divorce you should have sought before getting involved with me. You've lost a man who once loved you, and now you've lost me too. The other guy who cared deeply for you. No, Tom. We can fix this. I promise. I'll do anything to make it work so we can be together. No, Maria. You played a dangerous game and we both ended up losing. She tried to argue again, but I raised my hand to stop her. No, Maria, it's not my decision anymore. You ensured that from the start. No matter how hard we try now, we can't undo the damage. There's no happy ending for us. I'm sorry, but this is goodbye. Her eyes pleaded with me to reconsider, but they saw my resolve and she slowly nodded in acceptance. I'm truly sorry, Tom. I wish I had been clearer-headed and made the right choices. I wasn't sure if clarity was her issue, but I agreed with her apology. Me too, Maria. Take care, and I hope you find happiness. Tears streamed down Maria's cheeks as I walked away, my own heartache hidden inside. Surprisingly, the plane had plenty of empty seats. Mine was near the back, with no one occupying either the window or middle seat to my left. I barely paid attention to the safety instructions. I had flown on the 737 so many times that I could have recited them myself. The flight attendant who came by to check on my seatbelt, stowage of my personal item, tray table position, and seat alignment hardly registered with me. During takeoff, I shut my eyes, attempting to push thoughts of Maria from my mind. Images of her floated around me, reminiscent of the alluring figures in those James Bond opening sequences, tempting me to join her once more. "Excuse me, sir?" the attendant asked a while later as beverage service began. "Can I get you anything?" "Just water, please," I replied, looking up at her. She had blue eyes, a pleasant smile, and a short bob of dark hair, looking every bit the quintessential flight attendant in her uniform. I tried to muster a smile. "Nothing stronger?" "You look like you've lost your best friend," she remarked. "I did. I ended things with her." "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to pry." She handed me the water and moved on, and I returned to my thoughts and frustrations. "Hey again," came a soft whisper. Services paused for a bit. "Want to talk about it? About what happened, since I've already pried and all?" I couldn't help but smile a bit more genuinely this time. "Is the airline offering in-flight psychologists now along with movies?" She chuckled. "No, but you looked so sad. And then what you said hit close to home. I went through something similar a while back when I realized he preferred things the way they were over being with me. 5 years wasted. Do you want to share your story? Or should I leave you be?" "Thanks for noticing and asking. Not many people do that these days." Lesson 1 in recovering from a breakup. There are still good people out there. "Thanks. You know, despite my initial doubts, I'm actually enjoying this extra service." She laughed. "Good to hear. So do you want to share a bit about your situation? Maybe I can offer some fresh insights on what happened, give you some bang for your buck if that's okay." "Yeah, sure, thanks. My girlfriend and I have been apart for a while now after I caught her lying. She's tried to patch things up, but I just can't trust her enough to make our relationship permanent, especially after a similar situation with my ex. You know what they say, once bitten, twice shy? Yeah, I get it. My ex-husband betrayed my trust. I gave him another chance, and he hurt me even worse by cheating again. I learned my lesson the hard way." "I'm sorry to hear that." "Thanks, but that was 12 years ago. Somehow, I've been lucky since then. It wasn't planned, but I've managed to avoid him ever since." "Too bad we're on a plane. There's no wood for you to knock on." She shrugged. "I don't think it would make a difference. I'm older now, and he probably hasn't changed much either. If we ever happen to cross paths again, I'll just keep quiet and walk right past him. Oh, and I'll do the same with Benjamin, my status quo guy." Despite her duties, which didn't take long due to the empty plane, she surprised me by returning. We continued our conversation for most of the flight, which lifted my spirits and brightened my mood. After we landed and the passengers in front started disembarking, I thought about what lay ahead and let out a sigh. Don't be too hard on yourself. It hurts, but it's not the end of the world. You'll be okay. Turning, I saw her standing in the aisle just behind my row of seats. I got up from my window seat and stood upright in front of her, ducking under the overhead bins. "Thanks for talking with me. You really made this miserable flight much better. By the way, I'm Tom." She smiled and extended her hand. "Nice to meet you, Tom. I'm Cindy," we both said simultaneously, pointing to her name tag. She chuckled and handed me a card. I don't usually give these out, but I have a feeling you could use a friend. If you ever want to talk, my cell number is on there. I took the card and glanced at it. Thanks, Cindy, and thanks, something. I might just do that. We said our goodbyes after we got off the plane and didn't see each other again. As I made my way to the parking lot for my car, I set down my carry-on bag, pulled out my phone, and Cindy's card. I scanned her card into my contacts and then opened a message to her. Hi, Cindy. It's Tom from the plane. This is my cell. It was great talking to you. Hope our paths cross again sometime. I remembered Vincent DePrimo's ominous parting words, but they felt fitting now. It was too early and I was still hurting too much to say more. By sending this message, maybe Cindy would remember me if I ever reached out for real. I slipped my phone back into my pocket and walked out of the terminal into the bright sun. Despite the Texas heat making me sweat immediately, I looked forward to the cool air conditioning inside. Yet before I'd gone 30 feet, my phone buzzed with an incoming text. I checked it and read, Cindy, hi Tom, me too. Her brief reply warmed my heart more than the scorching sun. Maria was out of my life now, but maybe I'd find new love in the future, perhaps with Cindy or someone else. I didn't have to be alone and lonely forever. Almost forgetting about the summer heat and feeling a new sense of optimism, I smiled and looked ahead to what lay ahead. 35 years later, at our reunion with tickets in hand, I headed to the bar. The closest one to our table had a long line, so I walked further around the ballroom to the next one. As I made my way, I reflected on how much everyone had changed since our 25-year reunion. Many had gained weight, lost hair, and showed more signs of aging with extra lines on their faces. Some had gray hair, and a few tried to fight aging with hair dyes, transplants, or plastic surgery, with mixed results. Now in our late 50s, most of us from our graduating class seemed to be in decent shape and enjoying themselves. However, a few individuals looked much older, perhaps due to genetics or a life of hard living, showing how time had affected their appearance and, in many cases, their health. They were hardly recognizable compared to our youthful days together. In fact, aside from a handful of close friends and those I've kept in touch with, most of my classmates were now distant memories, some barely recognizable. Then there was a table in one corner of the ballroom marked with a single battery-operated candle, thanks to the fire marshal. It bore the words "In Memoriam," listing the names of those who had passed away for various reasons over the years. Keith Schilling, always struggling with weight, passed away as expected due to heart issues, leaving behind his wife Gabby and their almost grown children. The deaths that hit hardest were Larry and Nina Kilgrove, who tragically died in a plane crash when their Piper lost power, leaving no safe place to land. Mark, Andy, and I had served as pallbearers at their funeral. Arriving at the next bar, I found only a few people in line ahead of me. I waited, scanning faces to see if I could recognize anyone before resorting to reading their name tags. Not spotting anyone familiar nearby, I turned back to the front as the line moved forward. The man at the bar seemed a bit tipsy, flirting with the young female bartender who looked much younger than my wife, Evelyn, now a mother of two with a third child on the way. With drinks in hand, the man turned towards me, and upon closer inspection, I realized I knew him but couldn't place him until I saw his name tag labeled Guest. Mr. Jarrett, I wondered if we'd meet here, he said with a smile. Mr. DePrimo, I'm surprised to see you, I replied. He grinned. Why not? My wife, though she graduated a semester late, was one of your classmates, remember? My heart raced at the mention of Maria. When we parted, she was divorcing him. Had something changed to bring them back together? Turning to shout, DePrimo called out, Maria, get over here. Come see your old flame. No, I hadn't heard from Maria since I walked out of that small restaurant in New Jersey over 9 years ago. But here she was, approaching me. Her smile, always quick to appear, was absent as she came closer. She glanced at Vince DePrimo, who nodded before turning to me. Hi, Tom. I was hoping I'd find you here. Hi, Maria. I didn't see your name on the guest list, so I didn't expect you. How have you been? Tell you what, you two catch up. I'll be over at our table, watching. DePrimo nodded at me as if asserting his dominance, then exchanged a look with Maria before heading to their table a few spots back from the bar. Glancing over, I noticed he was watching me intently, like he was scrutinizing every move. Maria looked at me and hesitated. I know what you're thinking. Why? I nodded. I wanted to leave him, but when you said goodbye, I had to make a tough decision. It seemed easier to stay and tolerate his indiscretions than to start fresh on my own. He treats me well most. A hand touched my elbow, interrupting us. Hey, Tom, I was wondering where you went, said Gabby. "Oh, hi, Maria. I'm Gabby, from our class," she added, noticing Maria looking at her name tag. She slid her hand down my forearm and intertwined her fingers with mine. And Tom's wife, of course. Maria's expression as she glanced at Gabby and then at me was priceless, a mix of surprise and denial. She greeted Gabby briefly and then found a reason to leave. I watched her depart, briefly wondering about what might have been before refocusing on reality. And, I thought, reality was so much better. As Gabby and I ordered our drinks, I reflected on how fortunate I was and all that had transpired. After meeting Cindy on the flight, we dated for a while, proving that there are good people out there, even if they aren't always the right match. This realization helped me move forward in life. When Keith passed away about a year later, I supported a grieving Gabby with some of the arrangements and spoke at Keith's funeral. We remained friends over the years, with me checking in on her occasionally to offer support and listen to her frustrations. However, it wasn't until Larry and Nina's funeral, nearly 3 years later, and after Gabby had processed her grief, that we truly connected and started to build something deeper. Unexpectedly hitting it off, we married just over a year later. Returning to our table with friends, Gabby remarked, "Maria doesn't look happy, does she?" "No, I don't think so," I agreed. "She played a deceitful game and lost. Now she's serving her time until one of them passes away or they give up and move on. Since I doubt they'll ever give up, I bet they'll both live into their 90s just out of spite to deny each other the satisfaction. Play stupid games, win stupid prizes," Gabby chuckled, quoting a saying. "Or in this case, wicked games, as you said." Speaking of games, want to take a break for a bit? I've got an idea for a game we can play upstairs that might take your mind off her and everything else. We dropped off Mark and Jane's drinks at the table and told them we were going for a walk, though from their look at each other, I knew they didn't buy it. As we walked away, Gabby leaned in and whispered, "We've given them an idea. They'll be right behind us, 5 minutes tops." Chuckling, I agreed, saying, "Let's pick up the pace so they don't catch us." We retraced our steps from the conference center to the hotel. Barely getting the door to our room closed, Gabby was all over me, showing me how much she loved me, and that dwelling on the past was a waste of time. Our clothes were off in moments, slipping off between kisses and gentle touches, and then we were in bed, eager for each other. Gabby climbed on top of me, pressing close as we moved together. With tender kisses, she brought us even closer, focusing only on us and nothing else in the world. Together, we reached the peak of pleasure, Gabby letting out a wonderful moan, and me a prolonged, satisfied groan, giving our all to each other before she settled gently on me, my arms wrapped around her, holding her close. "I love you, Tom," she whispered, breathless. "I love you too, sweetheart." We lay there catching our breath for a few minutes before I asked about heading back to our class party. Gabby shook her head. "I'd be up for staying right here all night if you want. Instead of heading back down to the party, we'll see everyone in our group at breakfast tomorrow anyway." I think you're onto something," I replied, thinking about Vincent DePrimo. "Yeah, we've probably bumped into enough people for one day. The only person I'm interested in seeing again tonight is you. So, if you're ready, let's work on uncrossing these." Gabby giggled, and we both smiled. Honestly, I'm not sure who had the bigger smile, but at that moment, I decided I was willing to stay up all night if necessary to find out.